I ate them. That's right.
I ate the divorce papers, Charles.
I ate them with ketchup.
They were, they was good.
Oh, good.
This is the opening of a 2-minute monologue, officially titled, I Ate the Divorce Papers. It comes from Goodbye Charles, a one-act play by Gabriel Davis, and for those in the know, that is to say, anyone who was in a high school theater program in the last 12 years, it's among the most overdone monologues of the 21st century. And if you need any proof of that claim, simply search for Divorce Papers monologue on YouTube, and you'll scroll through video after video of actresses' self-tapes, all yelling that they can't get serious about their divorce because they never had a serious marriage. Even if you've never sat in the blast radius of a 17-year-old in a jewel-toned dress shouting the monologue at an audition, there's still a chance you've heard about it anyway. The monologue has become a meme in its own right, with more than a few TikToks riffing on its ubiquity.
I ate them. That's right. I ate the divorce papers, Charles. I ate them with ketchup.
He's the saltiest of all the sea dogs.
He's the most hated creature in Bikini Bottom.
And he's finally got a Krabby Patty!
But where did this monologue come from? And more importantly, how did a monologue from a recent and lesser-known play gain this kind of cultural gravity? And why do high school girls keep using it to audition for the Addams Family? So, to answer this question, I conducted a survey of actors who have performed I Ate the Divorce Papers. And on top of that, I interviewed the author of Goodbye Charles to hear his thoughts on it. And after all that, I've come to the conclusion that it's way more complicated than I gave it credit for. Both the story of the monologue and the monologue itself. So please join me as we take a deep dive into Before we begin, I'd like to thank Gabriel Davis for talking about the piece with me. While he appreciates the popularity of the monologue, he has written other material since, and has no desire to be known solely as the Divorce Papers guy. Also, as someone who works a day job outside of the theater, he values his anonymity. So his picture won't be featured here, and at his request, all audio clips of his responses in this video won't be his own voice, but are being dubbed by an actor. But the words are his, and I thank him again for sharing them. So let's get into the backstory. The first draft of the monologue was written in the late 2000s at Carnegie Mellon University, where Gabriel Davis was pursuing his MFA in dramatic writing. During a class taught by playwright and professor Milan Stitt, Davis was given the assignment to write monologues that could be used by the graduating acting students during their senior showcases. One of them ended up being about divorce papers.
As part of the assignment, the actors performed our monologues. I Ate the Divorce Papers filled the house with laughs at a level I hadn't experienced with my work since In Mad Love with Jill, the play that had gotten me into Carnegie Mellon and had been produced 2 years consecutively at the University of Pittsburgh. That play developed a following during its run, and I felt something similarly resonated with I Ate the Divorce Papers.
Davis was further encouraged after a play of his filled with monologues, Lacey's Last Chance, was similarly well received. But it was visiting artist Bruce Jordan, known for co-writing and directing the original Boston production of Sheer Madness, who read some of Davis's monologues and made the suggestion that he write a new play incorporating many of them into a single work. Within a few years of earning his MFA, Davis wrote Goodbye Charles, which featured 11 audition monologues in just 49 pages, including the one about the divorce papers. The play, published through Amazon's Create Space digital publishing division, first appeared online on September 30th, 2012. Goodbye Charles is a one-act dark comedy written for 3 women and 2 men, with doubling. The overarching story centers on Jill and Barb, having coffee while discussing their increasingly fraught relationships with men. From the frame of the coffee date, the main action of the play involves frequent cutaways to the past events in the women's lives. Jill, for her part, is navigating her relationship with her husband, Charles, a man who has been increasingly distant since their marriage, often criticizing her cooking and spending too many nights socializing at a cheese club in the city. Just before the events of the play, Charles punctuates a multi-day absence by unexpectedly sending divorce papers in the mail. 6 weeks later, Barb and Jill meet again, with more news. Charles returned to Jill to beg her to sign the divorce papers, which she refused to do. This is the location of the famous monologue. Jill demands the name of the woman Charles is leaving her for, and he reveals that her name is Cynthia. Jill then tracks down Andre, the organizer of the cheese club where Cynthia and Charles apparently met, and learns that the club hasn't actually met in years. The middle section of the play then sees Jill following a trail of people who all might know where Cynthia is, and each of whom divert the plot to have a long monologue of their own. Andre discusses his past history as a cheese thief, Andre's ex-wife Violet talks about accepting her new husband's identity as a leprechaun, that new husband, Kennedy, recounts his discovery that he is a leprechaun, then Kennedy talks about realizing he's actually not a leprechaun, then Kennedy recalls his first time falling in love with Cynthia, and then, after 5 monologues of distraction, Kennedy finally reveals to Jill where Cynthia is. Underground. Because she's dead. 6 weeks after that, Jill recounts Cynthia's funeral, where Charles gave the eulogy, a eulogy that quickly becomes a scene within a scene about Charles and Cynthia's relationship. After she saved his life from choking on an olive, she invited him to join her at her weekly CPA meetings, CPA standing for Commitment Phobes Anonymous. Charles, it turns out, wasn't actually having an affair with Cynthia, but was helping her get over her own doubts about marrying an entirely different man, which she did, and then promptly died. Charles ends his eulogy by quitting the CPA group and telling Jill that he now wants to stay together, but Jill, no longer able to trust that Charles can commit to her, decides to leave him anyway. Now, if I were to give an honest assessment of Goodbye Charles, with the caveat that I've only read it and I haven't seen it performed, my one-word review would be that it's overstuffed. Even my plot recap doesn't include all the side characters. Barb has a former partner named David, who gives 2 long monologues about trying to win Barb back. And Jill has a childhood friend named Paul, who is not so secretly also in love with her. He even gets a shout out in the Divorce Papers monologue itself. Plus, the structure of the play does mean that the action being staged is sometimes happening several layers of recollection deep. Cynthia's final monologue is about getting proposed to, which she is recollecting to Charles, which he is recounting as part of his eulogy, which Jill is telling Barb about secondhand, and all 4 scenes are playing out simultaneously on stage. Even before talking to Davis to confirm this was the case, the play sometimes feels like it was cobbled together from pre-existing monologues. As mentioned, the middle section of the play is basically Jill being shuttled from person to person, with each reciting a full, tangential monologue before finally giving her new information about where to find Cynthia. There's also one, and only one moment, wherein a character from within Jill's story steps outside of that conceit to recruit Barb, in the coffee shop framing device, to play a side character in his own recollection of his past. If you're having a difficult time following what I'm trying to explain here, I can assure you it's similarly difficult to follow while reading it. And yet, giving the play the benefit of the doubt, I'll point out that its anarchic comedic tone is often very funny. And, while much of the action of the play involves characters recounting things that happened off stage, it achieves that difficult balance with story monologues, where the characters are still going through distinct acting beats. In a play with a lot of recap, the emotions of the characters still feel present tense. I can easily imagine the play performing well for a fringe audience or a high school crowd, though the scattered use of F-bombs in the script do lead me to question who the play is actually aimed at. As for the Divorce Papers monologue itself, what additional context do we get from the rest of the play? The most considerable might be a moment in the play's first scene, when it's implied that Charles adds ketchup to all of Jill's meals, which she takes as an insult to her cooking. Thus, the line about eating the divorce papers with ketchup isn't just a non sequitur added to in the monologue, but a direct callback to an earlier slight against Jill by Charles, a call out that she's similarly cloaking something she doesn't like in ketchup. Reading the full play also informs us that Jill has been served the divorce papers unexpectedly, so this moment of yelling at Charles represents the first time they've actually discussed a potential divorce. We also know that by the end of the play, their positions will have reversed. Charles will be asking to stay together, while Jill will be the one signing the divorce papers. Which, it turns out, she didn't actually eat. As Charles deadpans in the final scene, she hates ketchup. So that's the context for the monologue, as it appears in Goodbye Charles. But this still begs the question, why is this monologue about a woman turning down her husband's divorce so popular? Why do actresses keep selecting it? Davis himself has some guesses as to why.
I was aiming to provide something that gives you a clear objective to pursue and takes you through a range of emotions in reaction to what's happening. Ergo, something that works as a good showcase of your talent and emotional range within the time constraints of an audition. I think that in some of the backlash, there's a feeling that we are meant to laugh at the character and see them as hysteric. However, I always felt, at least in my own reception of the piece, that we are empathizing with Jill's journey and laughing essentially as a cathartic release of some of the pain of what Jill's going through.
One of Davis's postgraduate jobs was working with Westport County Playhouse in Connecticut as their education associate, mentoring young theater artists. While there, he developed a list of traits often found in successful monologues, a list that would later become an article on the website Monologue Genie titled Monologue Writing 101: 10 Elements of Great Audition Monologues. Now, the first draft of the Divorce Papers monologue was written before this list was assembled, but I figure if it's been selected by so many performers, it's gotta be doing something right. So, to judge the quality of this monologue, let's see how well it satisfies each of the 10 points. 1. Your character must have a strong want. Pretty straightforward, Jill wants Charles not to divorce her. She needs to get him to stop pursuing the divorce any further, or she'll lose him. 2. The monologue must have high stakes. The stakes are pretty high for Jill, as the famous opening lines indicate. So completely does she reject the idea of a divorce that she's taken a pretty drastic action to prevent it. And even in the context of the play, where we later learn this isn't true, it's still a strong indication given to the person she's talking to that she's not messing around. Plus, as mentioned, this is the first time that Jill and Charles have talked following his disappearance for 4 days. From Jill's perspective, this could very well be the last time they ever have to hash this out, before he vanishes again, maybe permanently. So this issue really does need to be solved now. 3. Variety of tactics and persuasive moves. Again, Jill's overall goal is to get Charles to call off the divorce. A short list of tactics she employs to make this happen include denial, he can't divorce her without the papers; dismissal, she rejects the idea of a serious divorce as not befitting them; loss aversion, Charles doesn't want to lose somebody, quote, infinitely lovable; comparison, how much more Paul loves Jill than Charles does; romantic overtures, writing Charles a sonnet; and emotional honesty, straight up telling him that she still loves him. As Davis mentions, monologues are all about persuasion, about getting the other person on your side, and with each line of this monologue, Jill is trying a different way of doing that. 4. Hook opening. Yeah, check. 5. Button closing. In performing the entire monologue, there is a great quippy final line that ties it up. The truth is, Charles, I ate the divorce papers. I ate them because I can't stomach the thought of losing you. That's clever in its own right, not only that it's a parallel to the hook opening, but it also indicates how much Jill has changed over the course of the monologue, from yelling at Charles angrily to pining for him more purposefully. That said, not every person auditioning with the monologue will be using the full 2-minute cut. Because most of the early half of the monologue is straightforwardly comedic, nearly anywhere it would make sense to cut it in the middle would result in a good one-liner to cap off the piece. 6. Include detail that engages the senses. The most common of the senses for monologues to touch on is sight, giving the audience a memorable image to latch onto. But this point speaks to what makes the Divorce Papers monologue instantly iconic. It is the rare example of a monologue that begins with a sensation of taste. The idea of a mouthful of dry paper and wet ketchup can't really be called good, but A, it's a feeling audiences may be able to somewhat approximate, being familiar with the two sensations independent of each other. That's way too much f***ing ketchup for this bit. And B, it's not the kind of sensation you readily forget about once you've imagined it. Oh! Oh no! It was so stupid. Oh man, that sucked. Okay. Oh my god, that sucked. Aside from that opener, the monologue doesn't engage many other senses, save for a brief mention of Jill running her hand through Charles's hair near the midpoint. But the piece hardly needs more than that. The opening is such a unique sensory hypothetical, it grabs you right away. 7. Character overcomes internal obstacles. This is the point that saves many of the monologues in Goodbye Charles from being boring. It's not just characters recounting a story, but changing as they tell it. As mentioned in point 5, Jill begins the monologue at a comic peak of anger, and as the piece goes on, she evolves towards a more calm and saddened demeanor. But crucially, the sadness that Jill lands on by the end of the monologue is still there at the beginning. She just can't admit it. So driven is she at pushing back against Charles with this lie about the divorce papers that she refuses to admit her own emotional state. There's a lingering thread in the monologue about Jill wanting to say that she loves Charles the whole time, that it's because of her love for him that she can't sign the divorce papers. But first, she has to overcome her anger towards him for even suggesting a divorce in the first place. And that's the actual arc of the monologue, a woman pushing past her initial reaction of anger in order to dig through to the love she feels for her scene partner that's been there since the beginning. 8. balance past and present action. As mentioned, a bad monologue is simply a character recounting something that happened in the past, without any emotional growth in the present. While the Divorce Papers monologue has some moments of remembering, the comment about walking down the aisle, the tokens of affection from Paul, the action of eating the divorce papers in the first place, the core action of the monologue always returns to the present, about Jill's anger at Charles now, as she speaks to him about the divorce for the first time. And, importantly, all of the diversions to the past are used by Jill to forward her own arguments. She mentions Charles' comment about never having a serious marriage to justify her own unserious tactics. Paul is brought up to directly contrast Charles's emotional distance against someone who, honestly, is too emotionally vulnerable. This all goes hand in hand with point 3. Jill doesn't just cite the past to fill time, it's one of her shifting tactics towards her larger objective. 9. Discovery. To be honest, this one feels to me like a bit of a rehash of point 7. If a character is going to overcome an internal obstacle while speaking, then of course they're going to have to discover something new about themselves. And, as already mentioned, Jill does. Her immediate anger towards Charles falls away to reveal that she really does love him and not want him to leave, and thus the discovery that, for all her anger in the opening, she still doesn't want the divorce he's asking for. So, she learns to change her tactics. Less yelling, more plagiarized poetry. 10. Exercise restraint to build dramatic tension. This may seem to be the point that the monologue is the least successful at, given that the explosiveness of the opening paragraph can overshadow the rest of it. But perhaps this is a point that indicates not so much how the monologue is written, but how it should be performed. These points, after all, apply to actors as much as they do to writers. Through one lens, the monologue begins with a climactic moment of a woman shouting at her husband before softening at the midpoint. But take a more analytical approach to it, and it's a woman resorting to anger at the outset because she initially can't handle the emotional vulnerability that she gets to by the end. So there is still restraint being shown here on Jill's part. Plus, there's no guarantee that the opening lines have to be shouted. Yes, it's a common tactic for younger performers, but some of the best performances of the monologue I've watched treat the opening with a sort of Miranda Priestley ice-cold quiet, letting the absurdism of the sensory experiences carry the weight. The resultant journey through the monologue, from defensive to open, works to throw Charles off his guard, and to give the audience a clear picture of how Jill is evolving. As you can probably tell, these 10 points do overlap a lot, particularly in the case of 7 and 9, but it should also be clear by now that I Ate the Divorce Papers does achieve all of them. And it's unsurprising that it does. As a monologue originally written for a showcase of a particular actor's skills, it gives performers a lot of ground to cover in a 2-minute piece, which matches with some of the feedback I got from performers who have done the monologue in the past. At Davis's request, I put out a survey for people who have performed the monologue before. Now, I didn't hear from nearly enough people for the responses to be a representative sample of all the actors who have performed the monologue in the past, but I did get some great responses that spoke to why the piece has gained its broad appeal. Some of them cited the same points we just ran through: a great opening hook, strong sensory elements, a good evolution of the character from beginning to end. Most had overall positive feelings on it, with the caveat that, with its status as an overdone monologue, they likely wouldn't perform it again.
Often it was hard to pick between a comedic or a dramatic when we only had one monologue to use. This one is both, and this one's a bucket of fun.
It includes enough context and specificity to stand alone from the play itself, which, again, I think is very accessible for younger performers. It's got some heart and room for genuine moments, but also room to play.
It's a pretty quirky and, shocking kind of hook for a monologue. Maybe, psychologically, if you think about the general rage a lot of girls have to hold in due to misogyny, etc., maybe this was a way that we could let it out?
It's definitely a little goofy, but I think that's by design. I just think it's a shame the piece is so well known and perceived as more of a punchline than a monologue. I'd use it for auditions or showcases if it weren't used or joked about to death.
I thought it was so devastating and funny and above all, fun to perform. After learning it was cringe years later, I was like, oh no, I loved that piece. And reading it now, I was like, hey now, that's a fun little romp. Don't hate, y'all.
The most interesting thread across responses, however, was the similarities in how people discovered the monologue in the first place. Only a single person who filled out the form had actually read Goodbye Charles, and none of them had ever seen the play live. and furthermore, no one was ever assigned the monologue by a third party, be it a director or an educator. Universally, every person who filled out the form found the monologue on their own.
My drama teacher had monologue books we could use in his office. I opted for the internet, so I didn't accidentally do the same monologue as someone else. Did not dodge that bullet.
I thought I discovered this play/monologue, thought it was so underground and niche, and thought this was such a good find. I thought it was literally the perfect audition monologue because, at 15, long plus loud equals good.
Googling good funny monologues for women was the extent of my audition research at age 15, so I think I found it via Monologue Blogger.
Maybe it was posted online at a time when people started using the internet to find monologues, so it got a lot of searches?
IDK if Google pushed it or something, but whole ass, I think it was the first one or among the first that popped up on my Google search in 2012 for my first high school play freshman year.
At the time I thought it was funny and showed lots of emotion. Now I laugh whenever I hear it because it's the monologue you find if you Google monologues.
Here's where we get to the real answer of how this monologue came to dominate the high school auditoriums of the world. See, on the monologue aggregate website Monologue Genie, if you find the page for female monologues, the top result is I Ate the Divorce Papers. It's also the top result on the pages for 2-minute monologues and female monologues royalty-free. I don't know exactly what Google's metrics were turning up in 2012, but as of this recording, for any basic monologue search that includes the words monologue, women, female, funny, comedic, or the like, Monologue Genie is on the first page of results. And the website Monologue Genie was created by... Now hold on a second.
After deciding to look into employment outside the theater, I also got interested in applying my experience as a writer to generate side income. Given the success I'd had in the past with my monologues, and my own earlier experience as an actor struggling to find good monologues, I felt a monologue-focused site would have utility. I then researched what was out there and found a few folks, mostly playwrights like myself, were already doing this, but that the market was by no means saturated. I thought, cool, this is sort of a niche area where I can contribute and stay connected to my theater roots.
Now, I'm not saying that Gabriel Davis paid off Google to push his site to the top of search results. I think it was a combination of having a service people were looking for, simple and navigable site design, a wide variety of monologues to choose from, and just good old-fashioned luck. But it is still striking to look at the website and see how high a percentage of the monologues featured there happen to be by Gabriel Davis. If you've never performed a monologue from Goodbye Charles, maybe you've performed one from Unbearable Hotness, or Dreams in Captivity, or Quiche Isn't Sexy, or Hello Goodbye Peace, or maybe the second most infamous monologue on the site, Yoga Fart. Discovering this right at the beginning of my research, that a website providing royalty-free monologues to students also served the dual, more covert purpose of promoting a writer's work to an audience who would never have heard about it otherwise, I will admit there was a part of me that was kind of bothered by the subterfuge of it. But considering that most of the links on the site take you to collections of monologues all by a single author, who also happens to be the owner of that site, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it definitely felt like putting a thumb on the scale. A way of saying, here's some great audition monologues. And if they just happen to be all by the same author, well, that's just a coincidence. And to be clear, Monologue Genie does have pages containing monologues not by Davis, but you do have to scroll past the pages for female monologues, male monologues, timed monologues, and monologues for teens to find the lumped category of monologues for women, which separately lists pieces not by Davis. In all honesty, if I was an up-and-coming writer, if I had a binder of monologues I wanted to get out to people, and the website I built to share them ended up going viral in this way, yeah, I think I'd be pretty pleasantly surprised too. After all, I'm only making a video essay about Davis because he used the website to promote his own work. So in the end, I gotta say, well played, Gabriel Davis. Really, I think this is more a situation of actors being self-selecting than of Davis putting himself in a prime spot. Actors who are perceptive and really digging for new material will look beyond the first few links on the first website that Google recommends. But for the high school girls auditioning for the first time, who may not have experience searching for monologues before, It's no wonder they all went down the same pathway of clicking the first available links, and all ended up reading about divorce papers and ketchup. And then, for all the reasons listed before, they liked the monologue, and decided to run with it. And thus the stage is set for the scenario creatively envisioned by one of the survey respondents.
I feel like it's almost an initiation kind of thing, like a rite of passage. I don't know anyone who's performed it more than once, because then you learn the lore. You learn the history, the millions of others who, just as you and all before you, have eaten the forbidden fruit that is the divorce papers with ketchup. And then you're plagued with the knowledge that you can never eat the divorce papers again, all the while sitting idly by as the 7th graders of the world audition for The Little Mermaid Jr. with a monologue about a broken marriage. And ketchup.
And, as Davis mentioned, he's hardly the first person to do this. One of the survey respondents cited the website Monologue Blogger, and while the Divorce Papers monologue isn't actually there, that website is in a similar situation. Nearly every monologue on it is by the same person, Joseph Arnone. Head over to the Monologue database, and almost every piece coincidentally happens to be by Kelly Powell. Ace Your Audition appears to be aggregating work from all around the internet, but it still ends up being mostly Kelly Powell, Tara Meddaugh, and hey, it's Gabriel Davis again. Tara Meddaugh, by the way, has also taken the more transparent route, setting up pages on her own website to make her monologues available. Plenty of writers, it turns out, have websites for their monologues. G.L. Horton, Chris Wind, Jonathan Dorff, Arthur M. Jolly, and more than I can name here. And while I could sit here and debate the ethical divisions of presenting your website as Monologues by Arthur M. Jolly versus presenting it as Monologue Genie created by and heavily featuring Gabriel Davis, I'll be honest, it doesn't actually bug me that much, so let's drop that thread here. But it does remain fascinating to me that this subterranean layer of monologue curation exists. An entire generation of high school theater students, raised to find monologues online rather than in books, may be familiar with the writing of Davis, or Powell, or Meddaugh, or Arnone, despite never attending or reading their plays. They may have the greatest gap of any playwrights between how frequently their monologues are read versus how infrequently their plays are performed. Which is not to say that their plays never get performed. Davis makes it clear that companies still perform Goodbye Charles to this day. There was a production running at the Hollywood Fringe just this past summer. But for comparison, consider that Lauren Gunderson has been one of the most produced playwrights in the country across the last decade, and none of her monologues went viral on TikTok. So, to sum this up, to tie it together and eat it with ketchup, we ask again, how did the Divorce Papers monologue find such a foothold in the minds of high school girls? A bunch of factors, but primarily, being a well-crafted monologue that challenges performers, being published in an era when searching for monologues online was only just becoming common practice, and having a really incredible and sensory hook that kept it in people's heads. For more than 10 years, young women have been independently discovering this monologue, connecting with its desperate but lovesick protagonist, and choosing its unique blend of comedy and tragedy to show off their acting skills. And for the actresses who successfully got cast after using it, I suppose it can be considered a success. Davis himself considers the monologue a success. Having now moved away from working a day job in the theater, he still gets texts from friends when the monologue comes up in auditions.
My dad was talking to his next-door neighbor's daughter, who was a theater student, and he mentioned his playwright son's name was Gabriel, and she was like, "Wait a minute, Gabriel Davis? I know his monologues." While I benefited from working at theaters, I also felt a bit like I was in a hall of mirrors creatively. So that informed my decision to pursue employment outside of the theater. Since then, I've continuously been writing, and I've had the pleasure of seeing my plays produced here in the US and abroad, from Mexico to Turkey, from college productions to high school and community theater productions. If this is what leaving the theater industry looks like, I'm at peace with it.
Of course, there is, perhaps, one final question to ask. With many of the actresses performing the monologue being so young and so inexperienced, I'm left wondering, what would this monologue look like if it was performed by somebody who was really good at acting? Like, how would this monologue sound in the voice of someone who's truly a world-class talent, someone for whom acting is their full-time profession? Would it live up to its excellent craft? Would it cease to be a joke? I suppose we'll never know.
I ate them. That's right. I ate the divorce papers, Charles. I ate them with ketchup, and they were good. You probably want me to get serious about our divorce. The thing is, you always called our marriage a joke, so let's use logic here. If A, we never had a serious marriage, then B, we can't have a serious divorce. No, we can't. The whole thing's a farce, Charles. A farce that tastes good with ketchup. I mean, wasn't it last week? Your dad asked you the reason you walked down that aisle with me, and you said, for the exercise. Ha ha, that's funny. You're a funny guy, Charles. I'm laughing, not a crying. Ha ha. I'm laughing because you're about to give up on a woman who was infinitely lovable. For instance, Paul. He has loved me since the 8th grade. Sure, he's a little creepy, but he really loves me. He's made 127 passes at me, proposed 47 times, and then sent me over 200 original love sonnets. He sees something in me, Charles, and he writes it down in metered verse. And that's not something you just find every day. Someone who really loves everything about you, who you are as a person. Paul may be insane, but I value his feelings for me. I would never ask him to sign his name to a piece of paper promising to just turn off his feelings for me forever. But that's what you're asking me to do for you. To sign away my right to that sweet voice, Charles, those baby brown eyes, the way your hands feel through my hair before bed. Those aren't things I want to lose. In fact, I won't lose them. I won't lose you. I'll woo you. I've written you a sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and I'm not crying. I'm laughing. It's all a big joke. It's very funny, Charles. I keep waiting for you to say, April Fools, and then I'll rush into your arms. But you're not going to, are you? No, of course not. It's not April. I really didn't write that sonnet, Paul did. I think it's good. You see, the truth is, Charles, I ate the divorce papers. I ate them because I can't stomach the thought of losing you.